بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كتاب القدر, the book of Predestination. Let's take the first hadith from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He says he is the as-sadiq al-masduq. Sadiq as in he is truthful in what he says. Masduq, that which he says is true. The information item is the true information item. That the Prophet said, إِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ يُجْمَعُ خَلْقُهُ فِي بَطْنِ أُمِّهِ 40 يَوْمًا. The creation of one of you is in the belly of his mother for 40 days. ثم يكون في ذلك علقة مثل ذلك. And after that he is an alaqa for a similar period, that is 40 days. ثم يكون في ذلك مضغة مثل ذلك. And then for a similar period he is a mudgha, which is like a chewed piece of flesh. ثم يرسل الملك فينفخ فيه الروح. Then an angel is sent and blows the soul into him. ويؤمر بأربع كلمات, and he is ordered to write 4 things. بكتب رزقه وأجله وعمله وشقي أو سعيد. He is ordered to write his rizq, his provision in the life, his ajal, how long he will live, his amal, his actions that he will perform, and whether he will be miserable or happy. فوالذي لا إله غيره إن أحدكم ليعمل بعمل أهل الجنة حتى ما يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع فيسبق عليه الكتاب فيعمل بعمل أهل النار فيدخلها. By the one whom there is no righteous deity except he, one of you does actions of the people of Jannah, and then the decree overtakes him, and he does the actions of the people of the fire and enters it. وإن أحدكم ليعمل بعمل أهل النار حتى ما يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع فيسبق عليه الكتاب فيعمل بعمل أهل الجنة فيدخلها. And one of you does the actions of the people of fire until there is only a cubit between him and the fire, but then the decree overtakes him and he does the actions of the people of Jannah and enters it. Notice here Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says that the Prophet is as-sadiq al-masduq, and the reason why he says that is because the hadith which is coming up is about the matter of the unseen. And about the matter of the unseen you have to put your total faith and trust in the Prophet, that he is the truthful one, because there is no way you can actually verify this. Why? Because it is the matter of the unseen. So for the first 40 days the Prophet says that his creation is gathered together, and so this would be the mixed fluid from the father and the mother. And then for another 40 days an alaqa, which is something which hangs, from ta'liq, to hang something. So it is like a fluid or some blood which is hanging. So it will be something like a solid blood, and it becomes harder and harder as the time goes on, until it becomes a mudgha, which is like a chewed piece of flesh. The mudgha can be mukhallaqa and ghayr mukhallaqa. The mukhallaqa is fashioned in the form of a human. Ghayr mukhallaqa is not fashioned in the form of a human. Normally the mukhallaqa is at 90 days. Then after all of this, so 120 days in total have passed, the soul is blown in. And this is particularly important because if the child here dies at this stage, then janazah prayer is prayed for him because he's treated like a full human, and he's to be named and the aqiqah be done for him, just like a normal human being. And we find also from the hadith that there is an angel in charge of writing these things down for this child and also breathing the soul into him. So we have an angel that gives life, and we have an angel that takes life. As for the soul, we have been given little knowledge of it. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. You have only been given a small amount of knowledge. But what we do know is that this soul is in our bodies, so it's like our physical bodies are a clothing for the soul. If the child dies after 120 days, so that's 120 and after, then he is to be washed and a kafan around him, prayed over, and buried in the Muslim cemetery. And before that time, these rulings do not apply. So he could just be basically buried in any hole. Does not need to be in a Muslim cemetery. What about if a child reaches 120 days or above, but he is born to kuffar parents? Is he buried in a Muslim cemetery? The answer is no. He is in following with the kuffar. And this is because the Prophet said about the children of the kuffar, hum minhum, they are from them. So they are in following with the kuffar. Also, we have to mention that he should be named and the aqiqah performed for him. And so the malak, the angel, writes 4 points. His rizq, this is the provision, how much it will be, when it will be, and these types of details. He writes down his lifespan, He writes down his amal. Will he be one who performs righteous actions or evil actions? And he writes down his final end. Will he be shaqi, miserable, or sa'id, happy? And this must be a reference to the ayah of the Quran in Surah Hud. فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ شَقُوا فَفِي النَّارِ لَهُمْ فِيهَا زَفِيرٌ وَشَهِيقٌ. And then he goes on to say, وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ سُعِدُوا فَفِي الْجَنَّةِ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا. So this is your final end. If you're from the Jannah, you're sa'id. If you're from the fire, you are shaqi, which is miserable or wretched. Now, where does he write this? Some narrations have said that he writes it on your forehead. Of course, you cannot see any writing on your forehead, but these are from the matters of the unseen. We do not know how they manifest. If those narrations are authentic, then so be it. Otherwise, our job is simply to believe that they are written down. Now, the hadith goes on to say that by the one whom there is no other true deity, one of you does the works of the people of Jannah until he only has a cubit between him and Jannah, until the kitab, the decree, overtakes him, and he starts to do the works of the people of the fire and enters it. Now, listening to this, one may become extremely worried, especially a righteous person who is working righteous actions. He may become worried that one day he will enter the fire, or at least this is a possibility. However, we need to understand this hadith in the following way, that he does actions of the people of Jannah in that which appears outwardly. فِيمَا يَبْدُو لِلنَّاسِ. And this hadith is actually coming up, in what appears to the people. But as for the one who performs righteous actions from the heart and with pure ikhlas, then Allah Jalla wa Ala will not leave him in the lurch. Rather, Allah will honor him and increase him in his guidance. So the point is that if people are even working righteousness in that which appears outwardly, but in their heart there is fasad, there is corruption, there is no ikhlas, then these people, their final end will be performing actions of the people of the fire, as Allah Jalla wa Ala will leave them in the lurch. Then the Prophet goes on to say that a person can perform evil actions until he just has a cubit between him and the fire, but then the decree overtakes him and he works righteousness and enters Jannah. So this is the opposite. And something like this happened with a man called Al-Asram ibn Abd al-Ashhal, who was opposed to the da'wah of the Prophet. But then he accepted it and fought in the Battle of Uhud and fell. And he was asked, why did you fight? Was it out of love for your tribe, or was it out of desire for Islam? And he said, it is out of desire for Islam and convey my shahada to the Prophet. And when this was done, the Prophet said, إِنَّهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ. He is from the people of Jannah. And about him the Prophet also said, عَمِلَ قَلِيلًا وَأُجِرَ كَثِيرًا. He worked little but was rewarded much. So in the beginning he was opposed to Islam, but then he embraced and fought and immediately died. So he did not live a long life as a Muslim. So he worked very little, but he was rewarded much. And this should give us hope that even a kafir whom you perhaps have lost hope in may still one day turn to Islam. He may embrace Islam when there is only a cubit between him and the fire. It is still not too late. And looking at this hadith, it becomes known that we need to ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to keep us firm, so that we do not deviate from the right path. We ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to grant us death upon Iman by His grace and blessing. Also in the chapter, Ali radiallahu anhu reports, one day the Prophet was sitting with a piece of wood in his hand, scratching the ground. And then he raised his head and said, مَا مِنْكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ إِلَّا وَقَدْ عُلِمَ مَنْزِلُهَا مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ. There is not a soul amongst you except that its place in the Jannah or the fire is known. So the people asked, Ya Rasulullah, فَلِمَا نَعْمَلْ أَفَلَا نَتَّكِلْ? O Messenger of Allah, why should we then do these works and deeds that we are doing? Shall we not just rely on this knowledge alone, meaning this decree? To which the Prophet replied, لَا اعْمَلُوا فَكُلٌّ مُيَسَّرٌ لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. No, do your works, because everyone will find it easy to do the works for that which he has been created. And then he recited, فَأَمَّا مَنْ أَعْطَى وَاتَّقَى وَصَدَّقَ بِالْحُسْنَى فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْيُسْرَى وَأَمَّا مَنْ بَخِلَ وَاسْتَغْنَى وَكَذَّبَ بِالْحُسْنَى فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْعُسْرَى. As for the one who gives to the needy and has taqwa and he believes in the best, that is the truth of Islam, then we shall make easy for him the path of ease. But as for the one who is stingy and deems himself to be self-sufficient, and he belies the truth, then we shall make easy for him the path of hardship. This hadith teaches us that Allah Jalla wa Ala knows what will happen in the future, and He knows the end result of every single nafs or soul. But that's the point. Allah knows, we do not. So how can we say that we will just rely on the decree when we do not know what our end result is? Therefore, it is upon us to work and try to achieve the best we can. And everyone will find it easy to do the works for that which he has been created. If you have been created for the fire, you will find it easy to perform the works of the fire. That is, actions which will lead you to Jahannam. And if you are made for Jannah, you will find it easy to perform actions which will lead you to Jannah. And this is something which we can witness when we observe the righteous and when we observe the wicked. The wicked people will never accept the righteous path. وَإِن يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. If they see every ayah, every sign, they will not believe. وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الرُّشْدِ لَا يَتَّخِذُوهُ سَبِيلًا. If they see the path of guidance, they will not take this as their path. وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الْغَيِّ يَتَّخِذُوهُ سَبِيلًا. But if they see the path of misguidance, they will take it as the path which they're going to adopt. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا وَكَانُوا عَنْهَا غَافِلِينَ. That is because they belied our ayat and were heedless of them. And just in case someone says, well, if my seat in the Jahannam is already established, then what hope do I have? And so he justifies his evil actions. We say, this is batil. Instead of saying that, why could you not just turn it right around and say that my seat in Jannah is established, so this is why I'm performing righteous actions? There is no basis whatsoever to justify your evil actions. Just because Allah Jalla wa Ala knows your future end is no basis for justifying your evil, because the point is that you do not know what your final end is. Also in the chapter from Sahal ibn Sa'ad, this hadith has passed in the book of Iman, but it makes its appearance here again, that the Prophet said, إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ فِيمَا يَبْدُو لِلنَّاسِ وَهُوَ مِنْ أَهْلِ النَّارِ وَإِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ النَّارِ فِيمَا يَبْدُو لِلنَّاسِ وَهُوَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ. A man performs actions of the people of Jannah in what appears to the people, but in fact he is from the people of the fire. And the man performs the actions of the hellfire in that which appears to the people, but in reality he is from the people of Jannah. The background of this hadith, as has preceded in the Kitab of Iman, which is the first book of Sahih Muslim, is that they saw a man bravely fighting in the battlefield for the Muslims. They were impressed, the companions, and they told the Prophet about him, and the Prophet said he is from the fire. And so one of the companions observed him. How come he is from the fire? He looked at him, followed him, and he found that he was wounded in the battle, and he could not keep patient, and thus killed himself. And so the companion informed this to the Prophet, to which the Prophet replied in the way as you have heard. But as for the one who performs righteous actions through his heart, with sincerity, then such a person, his actions will not go to waste. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Allah does not waste the reward of those who do good. Those who do good are those who perform righteous actions with sincerity and in accordance with the Sunnah. Then as for the person performing actions of the fire, but in fact he is from the people of Jannah, then we have many examples. There were so many men who were enemies of Islam, committing evil. Yet in the end, their life turned around and they became the best. And we already took the hadith, سَتَجِدُونَ مِنْ خَيْرِ النَّاسِ فِي هَذَا الْأَمْرِ أَكْرَهَهُمْ لَهُ قَبْلَ أَنْ يَقَعَ فِيهِ. You will find from the best of people in this matter of the deen of Islam to be those who hated it the most before they fell into it, meaning before they embraced Islam. Let's take a look at the next chapter about the argumentation between Adam and Musa alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Abu Hurairah reports that the Prophet said, احتج آدم وموسى فقال موسى يا آدم أنت أبونا خيبتنا وأخرجتنا من الجنة. Musa said, O Adam, you are our father. You let us down and kicked us out of Jannah. Adam replied, أنت موسى اصطفاك الله بكلامه وخط لك بيده أتلومني على أمر قدره الله علي قبل أن يخلقني ب40 سنة فحج آدم موسى. Adam replied, You are Musa. Allah chose you to speak with Him, and He wrote to you with His own hands, meaning the Torah. Are you going to blame me for something that Allah decreed for me to do 40 years before creating me? The Prophet went on to say, so Adam beat Musa in the argument. This hadith is referring to when Adam a.s. ate from the tree. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَعَصَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. Adam disobeyed his Rabb and went astray. The Mu'tazila do not accept this hadith because they say it is ahad, meaning it does not reach mutawatir level. And ahad, a hadith, will not be accepted in the aqidah. And their aqidah is that Allah Jalla wa Ala does not create the actions of man, and Allah does not decree the evil actions of man. The Jabariyah are on the opposite end. They say that Allah forces the servant to do what he is doing, and they would use this hadith. They say that Adam a.s. used the Qadar to defend himself, and the Prophet here in this hadith approves of it. So that is to say, I committed sin because it was written for me to commit sin. Allah forced me to commit sin. As for not accepting the ahad hadith for the aqidah, then this is batil and a bid'ah. We have not known this from the Sahaba. The Sahaba would accept ahad hadith in matters of aqidah, no doubt about that. And even if you accept ahad hadith in matters of fiqh, which is what they do accept, but you have to have the aqidah first. If a hadith comes to you telling you that there are 5 prayers in a day, and so you act upon it and pray 5 times a day, you would not be praying 5 times a day until first you had the aqidah, that belief that there are 5 prayers in a day. So even a hadith pertaining to fiqh contain aqidah. It's aqidah first, action second. So this idea about not accepting ahad hadith for aqidah is self-referentially incoherent. That is to say, it's self-contradictory. It refutes its own self. Because like we said, if you accept the hadith pertaining to fiqh matters, then you are ipso facto accepting the aqidah, which is infused in this fiqh hadith. As for the Jabariyah, are they justified in saying that you can use the Qadar to justify your evil actions? Well, Ibn Qayyim says that you can use Qadar to justify your evil actions after you have repented, because do not forget that Adam a.s. repented. And if that's the case, then you can use the Qadar to justify your evil actions. But you cannot use it to justify your evil actions in continuing to commit evil. Ibn Taymiyyah says that Adam a.s. did not use the Qadar to justify his evil action. Rather, he used the Qadar to justify his expulsion from Jannah. Because the evil sin took place through his free will, and hence you cannot use Qadar to justify that. But the expulsion from Jannah did not take place through his own choice. That was the decision of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So when he says, do you blame me for something that Allah decreed for me 40 years before creating me, he is not, upon Ibn Taymiyyah's opinion, talking about the eating from the tree. Rather, he is talking about the expulsion from Jannah. A similar case might be that if a person goes out to travel, and during this travel he is met with hardship and much suffering. And so somebody says to him, why did you travel? Because look now how you are suffering in your traveling. But then to that the man can reply, look, I did not travel in order to suffer, but rather this suffering which took place as a result of traveling was by the decree of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So likewise, Adam a.s. did not eat from the tree in order to be expelled from Jannah. And we also have another hadith which would further explain this explanation of Ibn Taymiyyah, where the Prophet said, احرص على ما ينفعك واستعن بالله ولا تعجز وإن أصابك شيء فلا تقل لو أني فعلت كذا لكان كذا ولكن قل قدر الله وما شاء فعل. Be eager to do that which benefits you and seek the help of Allah, and do not become weak. And if anything afflicts you of calamity, then do not say, oh, if I had done it that way, then this would have happened. Meaning saying this out of regret and lamenting the qadr of Allah. Rather, you should say that Allah has decreed and He does what He wills. So the consequence of your action is not in your hand. What is in your hand is to perform the action itself because of your free will and ability which you have. Therefore, if you commit evil sins, it was done out of your own free will. Therefore, you cannot use qadr to justify this evil. And this opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah is well argued. And as you've heard, the opinion of Ibn al-Qayyim is that you can use Qadar to even justify your evil actions done through your free will, as long as, meaning on the condition that you have repented from it. Whereas this is an understandable argument. Ibn Taymiyyah's understanding of the hadith is more worthy to be followed. That being said, there is no excuse for evildoers to justify their evil based on the Qadar. This is exactly what the mushrikeen did. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, سيقول الذين أشركوا لو شاء الله ما أشركنا ولا آباؤنا ولا حرمنا من شيء كذلك كذب الذين من قبلهم حتى ذاقوا بأسنا قل هل عندكم من علم فتخرجوه لنا إن تتبعون إلا الظن وإن أنتم إلا تخرصون. This ayat in Surah Al-An'am, they will say, if Allah willed, we would not have committed shirk, neither our forefathers, nor would we have made haram what Allah makes halal. Allah Azza wa Jalla replies, thus did lie those before them until they tasted our punishment. So he completely refutes them. Likewise in Surah Al-Nahl, وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا عَبَدْنَا مِن دُونِهِ مِن شَيْءٍ نَحْنُ وَلَا آبَاؤُنَا وَلَا حَرَّمْنَا مِن دُونِهِ مِن شَيْءٍ كَذَلِكَ فَعَلَ الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِهِمْ فَهَلْ عَلَى الرُّسُلِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ. The mushrikun said, if Allah willed, we would not have worshipped besides Him anything, neither us nor our forefathers, and we would not have made anything haram which He has made halal. Allah says, the people before them said the same thing. And is there anything upon the messengers except to convey the truth plainly? So Allah Jalla wa Ala does not accept this batil argument. Also in the chapter, Abdullah ibn Amr reports that the Prophet said, كتب الله مقادير الخلائق قبل أن يخلق السماوات والأرض ب50,000 سنة وكان عرشه على الماء. Allah wrote down the measures of everything from the creation 50,000 years before He created the heavens and the earth, and His throne was upon the water. So we find everything is written in the Al-Lawh Al-Mahfuz before it takes place, which obviously means that Allah Jalla wa Ala knows what's going to happen before it will happen. Note here, the hadith is speaking about the writing. It is not speaking about the knowledge of Allah, because as for the knowledge of Allah, then it does not have a beginning, like Allah does not have a beginning. What we are talking about here is the actual writing. So there was never a point in time, or outside time for that matter, in which Allah Jalla wa Ala began to know something, where before He did not know it. No, there's no such concept such as this with Allah Jalla wa Ala. We also find that before the heavens and the earth was created, time did exist and the throne existed, and the throne is a creation of Allah Jalla wa Ala. As for Allah Jalla wa Ala Himself, then He is outside or independent of this universe. What does that mean? It means He is independent of space, that's the 3 dimension, and the 4th dimension of time. He's independent of all of that. The next chapter about Allah turning the hearts as He wills, from Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ قُلُوبَ بَنِي آدَمَ كُلَّهَا بَيْنَ إِصْبَعَيْنِ مِنْ أَصَابِعِ الرَّحْمَنِ كَقَلْبٍ وَاحِدٍ يُصَرِّفُهُ حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ. ثم قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم مصرف القلوب صرف قلوبنا على طاعتك. The Prophet said, the hearts of the children of Adam, all of them, are between 2 fingers of the fingers of the Rahman, just as if it was one heart. He turns them as He wills. And then the Prophet made a dua, O Allah, the turner of the hearts, turn our hearts towards your obedience. We learn from this hadith that Allah has control of the hearts. He guides whomsoever He wills and misguides whomsoever He wills. So do not feel despondent if you give da'wah to a kafir and he completely rejects it. Allah knows that in his heart there is no good and hence deprives him of guidance. And that being the case, the Prophet ﷺ has legislated this dua, to make dua to Allah Jalla wa Ala to turn our hearts towards His obedience, as that is the only way it will be possible for you to obey Him, if your heart is turned that way. It all depends on the heart. And if you're giving da'wah to a kafir and he's rejecting you, then it will be a good idea, using this hadith as an inspiration, to give him advice and say to him, why don't you make a supplication and call out and say, O Allah, if you know Islam to be the truth that I should follow, then turn me to it. Because with this supplication, even for a kafir, what has he got to lose? Maybe he does not believe in Allah, or perhaps he's not sure. Either way, no problem, he can still make a dua. can still say that, Allah, if you are up there, if you exist, and you know Islam to be the truth for me, then guide me to it. With this type of dua, what loss will the kafir have? It will not cost him anything. So the matter of belief and disbelief is not an intellectual one, rather it is one of the heart. And that's where the focus needs to be in da'wah. The next hadith, everything is by Qadar. The Tabi'i Tawus reports that he heard Abdullah ibn Umar saying, كل شيء بقدر حتى العجز والكيس أو الكيس والعجز. Everything is by decree, even incapacity and capability. That is to say, things which you can do and things which you cannot do is by Qadar. Also in the chapter, Abu Hurairah reports that the mushrikun came to argue with the Prophet about the matter of Qadar, to which Allah revealed, يَوْمَ يُسْحَبُونَ فِي النَّارِ عَلَى وُجُوهِهِمْ ذُوقُوا مَسَّ سَقَرَ إِنَّا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ. On the day they are dragged to the fire upon their faces, taste the touch of the fire, surely we have created everything by decree. So creating everything with Qadar means He has given a measure to everything. So this hadith is a simple, straightforward hadith which proves to us that everything happens because Allah has created it, He has foreknown it and has decreed it and willed it and also written it down, as we found in the previous hadith. And nothing escapes His Qadar. That is to say, nothing happens except that He has willed it, foreknown it and created it and written it down. The next chapter about the measure of zina of the son of Adam. Abu Hurairah reports that the Prophet said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَتَبَ عَلَى بْنِ آدَمَ حَظَّهُ مِنَ الزِّنَا أَدْرَكَ ذَلِكَ لَا مَحَالَةَ فَزِنَا الْعَيْنَيْنِ النَّظَرُ وَزِنَا اللِّسَانِ النُّطْقُ وَالنَّفْسُ تَمَنَّى وَتَشْتَهِي وَالْفَرْجُ يُصَدِّقُ ذَلِكَ أَوْ يُكَذِّبُ. Indeed, Allah has written down the portion of zina on the son of Adam, and there is no escape from it. So the zina of the eyes is looking, and the zina of the tongue is speaking, and then the soul desires and yearns, and the private parts may put that into effect or they may not. Ibn Abbas says that the lamam that Allah speaks about, I have not seen a better example than what Abu Hurairah spoke about, meaning in this hadith. Ibn Abbas refers to the ayah, الَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشَ إِلَّا اللَّمَمْ. Those who avoid the major sins and the shameless ones, excessive sins, except the lamam, these are the minor sins, which happen sometimes here and there. He's talking about the zina, which is not the major type of zina, so the zina of the eyes and the ears and the tongue and so on. The zina of the eye is looking at a woman who is non-mahram to you in a lustful way. The first sight is forgiven, but not the second one, and it is the second one which will be the minor sin. He talks about the zina of the tongue. This does not have to be licentious type of speech, rather it could just be speech in which you're talking about maybe a permissible topic, but you are enjoying speaking to the woman. You're enjoying the intimate company. That is the zina of the tongue. Otherwise, let's say maybe asking somebody for directions where you do not enjoy that company, enjoy the speech. This is not the zina of the tongue. And he talks about the zina of the nafs, that it desires and yearns. But this desiring and yearning is not the official type of zina. He goes on to say that the private parts may put that yearning into effect or they may not. That becomes the major zina, for which the had punishment applies. However, what is more interesting is that looking at another man with lust is worse than looking at a woman with lust, because sodomy is worse than zina. And with the sodomy practice, if you see two men walking by themselves or even in privacy, you would not suspect a thing. Whereas if you saw a man with a non-mahram woman in privacy, you would suspect something. Therefore, it is harder to commit zina with a non-mahram woman than it is to commit sodomy with a man, because no one will suspect you and hence you can get away with it easily. Henceforth, the punishment for such a sin is far, far worse. Al-Bayhaqi reports in his book Shu'ab al-Iman that Al-Hasan ibn Dhakwan said, "Do not sit with the children of the rich people because they look like women, and their fitna is worse than that of virgin girls." What about looking at a woman whom you are not attracted to? We say, even so, you must lower your gaze, because the shaitan runs in your veins like the blood, and he can easily cast lustful thoughts. The next hadith, about every child being born upon fitrah. Abu Hurairah reports the Prophet said, ما من مولود إلا يولد على الفطرة فأبواه يهودانه وينصرانه ويمجسانه كما تنتج البهيمة بهيمة جمعاء هل تحسون فيها من جدعاء. ثم يقول أبو هريرة: وقرأوا إن شئتم فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله. There is not a child born except that he is born upon fitrah. Then his parents make him into a Yahud or Christian or Majus. Just as you see the newly born animal, born with all the limbs intact. Do you see any deficient ones, or ones with the limbs cut off? And then Abu Hurairah said, then you may recite if you want, the fitrah of Allah which He has created man upon. There is no changing the creation of Allah. Also in the chapter, when the Prophet uttered this hadith, a man said, what about the children of the kuffar who died before adolescence? And the Prophet said, Allahu a'lamu bima kanu ya'malun. Allah knows best what they would have been doing. The fitrah spoken of here is the deen of al-Islam. It has to be, because the Prophet goes on to say, then his parents make him into a Yahud or Nasara or Majus. So what's the alternative? Well, it has to be Islam. And his good teaching technique, again, he gives a parable of an animal born with all its limbs intact. And the ayah as well supports this in Surah Ar-Rum, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا. Turn your face to the deen which inclines, that is, inclines away from falsehood. فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. This is the fitrah, the creation of Allah which He has created man upon. لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ. There cannot be any change to the creation of Allah. That is, every single human will be born upon Islam. ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. This is the straight deen, the straight way of life. But most of mankind do not know. This hadith needs to be borne in mind when giving da'wah to kuffar, because they're going to think that you're calling them to some different religion from the deserts of Arabia. No, we are calling them to return back to how they were born, and nothing can be closer to home than that. So calling to Islam is not calling you to something which is foreign. It is calling you to your own self. Now, with the parents turning the child into a Yahud, let's say, we make a distinction between being a Yahud hukman and being a Yahud physically. So hukman meaning in terms of your ruling that you take, and physically being an actual physical Yahud. Before the child reaches tamyiz, he would be a Yahudi hukman, so he would follow in his parents. That is to say, if he dies, he would be buried in a Yahudi cemetery, not a Muslim one, and he would not be prayed over and so on, because he's a Yahudi hukman. As for after the age of tamyiz, which is at around 7, he would be a Yahudi hissan, that is to say physically a Yahudi, just like his parents. Because before the tamyiz, he does not have the sense to choose the deen, and he's not really aware of what deen he's in. Whereas after the tamyiz, he is aware of the deen which he is in. And we learn from the hadith that the environment has a massive impact on you. And we took the hadith before as well, about the righteous companion being like the one who carries the misk, and the evil companion like the one who blows the bellows. So this narration is similar. What's interesting is the other narration in which the Prophet is asked, so what will happen to the children of the kuffar who have died? Because have they died on fitrah, in which case they will be just like the Muslims in the hereafter? And the Prophet says Allah knows what they were going to do. So upon this, some scholars have said that the children of the kuffar, if they die, Allah Jalla wa Ala will examine them, test them, and if they pass the test, they answer the call of Allah Jalla wa Ala, they will be with the Muslims in Jannah. If not, they will be with their parents in Jahannam. There are some narrations about children of the kuffar being tested, but they are all weak. As for the people being tested, what is authentic is that there are 4 types of people being tested: the deaf who never heard the message, the senile who never understood the message, the insane who again did not understand the message, and the person of the fatrah between Isa and Muhammad ﷺ who never received the message. The other credible madhab is that even the children of the kuffar, before they reach puberty, are in Jannah, just like the children of the Muslimin. The main evidence for this opinion is the narration in Al-Bukhari, where the Prophet had a dream that he was taken to Jannah, and he saw Ibrahim a.s. with many children around him, and he was told that this is Ibrahim, an elderly man, and the children around him are the children of the Muslimin and the Mushrikeen. And this appears to be the madhab of al-Bukhari himself, because he put the title of the hadith, what is said about the children of the Mushrikeen. So it's as if he believes that the children of the Mushrikeen, if they die in their youth, will be in Jannah. And Nawawi also favors this opinion. As for the narration in Muslim, which we have just covered, where the Prophet said, Allahu a'lamu bima kanu amilin, Allah knows best what they would have done had they lived on, then this statement is neither here nor there. It does not tell us whether they will be in Jannah or Jahannam. It's just neutral. So it's not a positive evidence. And so the argument is that we ought to take the ruling from the positive evidence rather than a neutral evidence. Also in the chapter, Ubay ibn Ka'ab reports that the Prophet said, إِنَّ الْغُلَامِ الَّذِي قَتَلَهُ الْخَضِرُ طُبِعَ كَافِرًا وَلَوْ عَاشَ لَأَرْهَقَ أَبَوَيْهِ طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. The young man whom Al-Khadir killed, if he lived on, he would have involved his parents in defiance and disbelief. So this hadith shows that Allah Jalla wa Ala knows what a person would go on to do. And this child would have gone on to become a kafir, not just that, but involved his parents with kufr as well. So all three of them would have been in the fire thereby. So better than that is to do away with the child, so that at least the parents can survive the hereafter and save themselves, and have another child who will not be a kafir. And then also on the opinion that the children, be they from the Muslims or from the kuffar, will always be in Jannah, then this kid who was killed will be in Jannah, whereas if he lived on, he would have been in Jahannam. So everybody wins, if you look at the bigger picture and take into account the akhirah. It also shows that the ahkam of Islam transcend this nonsense of morality which the kuffar go on about and practically worship, because to the average kafir, to kill a child would be immoral. But in Islam we have no concept of morality. Rather, the deen of Islam is based on the ahkam of Allah Jalla wa Ala, not morality, which is nothing more than the human lusts and desires and whims passed off as something which is rational and sensible. This nonsense of morality only has an effect in this life, whereas the ahkam of Allah Jalla wa Ala have an effect on this life and eternally in the hereafter, and henceforth it transcends morality. Also in the chapter related to this particular hadith, Aisha reports that a child of the Ansar died, and Aisha says that I said, طُوبَى لَهُ عُصْفُورٌ مِّنْ أَصَافِيرِ الْجَنَّةِ. Good news for him, he will be one of the sparrows of Jannah. He never worked any evil, nor did he reach any evil. But the Prophet replied, أَوْ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ, or other than that. يا عائشة إن الله خلق للجنة أهلا خلقهم لها وهم في أصلاب آبائهم وخلق للنار أهلا خلقهم لها وهم في أصلاب آبائهم. Allah created the people of Jannah. He created them for it when they were in the loins of their father. And He created for Jahannam its people. He created them for it, meaning for the fire, when they were in the loins of their father. It would appear from the hadith that the Prophet does not agree with Aisha, that you cannot say that this child will be in Jannah. And indeed it is not fitting for us to name anyone or point our finger at someone and say that he or she will be in Jannah, unless the text give us a warrant to do so. And so the Prophet is correcting Aisha here for her eagerness. The mainstream opinion among scholars is that the children of the Muslims follow the Muslims and will be in Jannah. As for the children of the kuffar, there's more of a difference. One opinion is that they will be in Jannah just like the children of the Muslims. The other opinion is that Allah Jalla wa Ala will test them further, that is in the hereafter. And yes, there can be tests in the hereafter. Where the testing stops is when you actually enter Jannah or Jahannam. That's when the testing stops, because before that you can still be tested on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Let's take the next chapter. That your livelihood does not increase or decrease beyond that which has been decreed. Abdullah reports that Habiba, the wife of the Prophet, said, Allahumma amti'ni bi zawji Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa bi Abi Sufyan wa bi akhi Muawiyah. She said, O Allah, enable me to derive benefit and pleasure with my husband, the Messenger of Allah والسلام, and with my father Abi Sufyan, and with my brother Muawiyah. To which the Prophet replied, قَدْ سَأَلْتِ اللَّهَ لِآجَالٍ مَضْرُوبَةٍ وَأَيَّامٍ مَعْدُودَةٍ وَأَرْزَاقٍ مَقْسُومَةٍ لن يعجل شيئا قبل حله أو يؤخر شيئا عن حله ولو كنت سألت الله أن يعيذك من عذاب في النار أو عذاب في القبر كان خيرا وأفضل. You have asked Allah about a lifespan already determined, and about a number of days already counted, and about provision already allotted. Allah will not do anything before its proper time, nor will He delay anything till after its allotted time. And had you asked Allah to protect you from the punishment in the fire or the punishment in the grave, that would have been better and more virtuous. And then the narration goes on that the Prophet was asked about those people who were transformed into monkeys, and one of the narrators says, or I think it was pigs, to which the Prophet replied, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لم يجعل لمسخ نسلا أو عقبا وقد كانت القردة والخنازير قبل ذلك. If Allah has metamorphosized any people, He has not made for them progeny, but these monkeys and apes were even before that. Here Habiba radiallahu anha is asking Allah Jalla wa Ala to increase her in her lifespan and provision with her husband and her father Abu Sufyan and her brother Muawiyah. The Prophet is telling her that you have asked about something that you ought not to be asking about, because the lifespan and provision cannot be increased beyond their set value in the Qadar of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Allah will not bring forward anything from its proper Qadar, and He will not delay anything after its proper Qadar. You cannot die one day before you have been decreed, neither can you die one day after you have been decreed to pass away. So the Prophet is rebuking her here for asking for an increase in her lifespan and provision, because this is already determined and decided. But he refers her to making dua to protect her from the punishment in the fire or the punishment in the grave. And this would be khayran wa afdal. One might ask her, but is that also not determined, just like your lifespan and the number of days and your provision being allotted? The answer to that is yes, that is also determined. But the telling difference between the two is that to seek protection and to make dua of protection from the fire and from the punishment in the grave is an ibadah, and we are ordered to perform acts of ibadah, whereas making dua for a lengthened life and provision is not ibadah. So just because Allah has decreed for you that you will be from the people of the Jannah does not mean that you don't need to pray anymore and fast and pay zakah and so on. Rather, you must implement these actions. And so likewise with the dua. Just because Allah has decreed that you are from the people of Jannah does not mean that you do not make dua for Jannah. This is ibadah, the other one is not. And we also learn from the hadith that if Allah metamorphosizes a people, He does not give it progeny. And that these monkeys and pigs that you see today are the progeny of the pigs and monkeys before. That is to say, even before these people were metamorphosized, there used to be pigs and monkeys. And so these pigs and monkeys are their progeny, not the progeny of the metamorphosized people. Let's take the next chapter about being strong and seeking the help of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Abu Hurairah reports that the Prophet said, المؤمن القوي خير وأحب إلى الله من المؤمن الضعيف وفي كل خير احرص على ما ينفعك واستعن بالله ولا تعجز وإن أصابك شيء فلا تقل لو أني فعلت كان كذا وكذا ولكن قل قدر الله وما شاء فعل فإن لو تفتح عمل الشيطان. The strong mu'min is better than the weak one, but in both there is goodness. Be eager to do that which benefits you and seek the help of Allah, and do not become weak and incapable. And if any calamity afflicts you, then do not say, oh, if only I had done this, then such and such would have happened. Rather, you say, this is the qadr of Allah and He does what He wills, because saying, oh, if only, opens up the works of shaitan. The Prophet says, al-mu'minul qawi, the strong mu'min. The adjective qawi pertains to the noun al-mu'min. So that is to say, the strong mu'min as in strong in his iman, not strong as in physical strength. This is from a linguistic standpoint of view. As from a rational standpoint of view, then if you are a strong mu'min, then that is not necessarily a virtue, because you could use your strength to commit evil. Whereas being strong in your Iman never leads to evil. It is only weakness in the Iman that leads to evil. So the strong mu'min is better and more beloved to Allah, but in both there is goodness. And he says this so that the listener does not think that the weak mu'min has no goodness in him. No, that is not correct. And this is called al-ihtiraz, when you seek precaution. That is, you are cautious that the listener does not misunderstand what you are saying. Allah Jalla wa Ala does it as well in the Quran when He says, وَكُلًّا وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الْحُسْنَى, and both of them He has promised goodness. Those who embraced Islam before the conquest of Mecca, and those who embraced afterwards. Likewise in Surah Al-Anbiya, وَدَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ إِذْ يَحْكُمَانِ فِي الْحَرْثِ إِذْ نَفَشَتْ فِيهِ غَنَمُ الْقَوْمِ وَكُنَّا لِحُكْمِهِمْ شَاهِدِينَ فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا سُلَيْمَانَ وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. So this is a judgment which both Dawood and Sulaiman ﷺ gave about a flock of sheep of a certain people who had pastured by night time. We gave the understanding to Sulaiman. So the listener may think that Dawood ﷺ, maybe he's deficient in his judgment. But Allah immediately goes on to say, and to each of them we have given the correct judgment in affairs and knowledge. Likewise with the people who fight and the people who do not fight, with their wealth and their lives. Of course the ones who fight are better, but He says, وَكُلًّا وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الْحُسْنَى. This is in Surah An-Nisa. We learn from the hadith that you are eager to do that which benefits you. This is the advice. So that is to say, do not waste time. Always be looking to do that which benefits you, both for this life and in the hereafter. Having said that, there is no doubt that the benefit of the deen outweighs the benefit of the dunya if ever you find yourself in a clash. And also choose between actions which are most beneficial. If two masajid are equal distance apart, but one has a larger jama'ah than the other, then go for the masjid with a larger jama'ah. This is more beneficial for you. Likewise, when you do not have a choice in committing an evil action, go for the one which is lesser of the evil. But he also goes on to say, seek the help of Allah. Because you may have much ability, but you may, because of your ability, become prideful and stop seeking the help of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and that's wrong. Even for small affairs, seek the help of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So whatever you do, have the feeling inside you that you are dependent upon the help of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And then he says, وَلَا تَعْجَزْ, do not become weak and incapable. So that is to say, do not procrastinate, do not become lazy, rather be a person of firm resoluteness. An example here would be for the student of knowledge. He begins to read a book, and he's all excited about it. But after 1 week, he becomes bored and moves on to the next book without having finished that first one. Now this is ajaz, being incapable of finishing off a task. Rather, you must persevere and see the matter through. And even after you have undertaken all the means, you may not attain your aim. And then you may regret your decisions. Oh, if only I had done it this way, I may have been successful. And it is only Allah Jalla wa Ala who can meet His aim all the time and every time. وَاللَّهُ غَالِبٌ عَلَى أَمْرِهِ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. So for example, if you're set out on a journey and your car breaks down, and then you regret saying, oh, if only I had driven another car or hired out from another company, this calamity would not have happened. Saying low, which means if only, this opens up the works of shaitan, will whisper into you to make you sad, and make you grieve and regret, and make you forget completely that this was the qadr of Allah Jalla wa Ala. It always had to have happened, written 50,000 years before Allah created the heavens and the earth, and that Allah does not decree or do anything except with wisdom. وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. You cannot will except if Allah wills. Verily Allah is the knowledgeable, the wise. So this is what His actions are based upon, knowledge and wisdom. So if that is known, then it ought to be known that any calamity that befalls you will be good for you in some way or the other, either in this world or in the hereafter. If matters do not go your way, you are allowed to use Qadar as an excuse, because you can argue with Qadar if that is valid, such as in this case. Because you did everything you could and still it did not work out, you can use Qadar as an excuse. Where you cannot use Qadar as an excuse is to persist in evil actions, so you can use the Qadar as an excuse in matters which are out of your control, not in matters of persisting in committing sin, because that is in your control. An example of this is the narration found in the Sahihain. The Prophet asked Ali, why did you not wake up for the Qiyamul Layl? And Ali says that our soul is in the hands of Allah. If He wills, we will wake up. And the Prophet left the house, slapping his thigh, reciting, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا. And mankind is most quarrelsome. Now this excuse that Ali used of Qadar is valid because when you're sleeping, you're not in control of yourself. So how can you wake yourself up for the nighttime prayer? And it can be that the Prophet wanted to test Ali to see how he will answer. Contrast that with if you tell somebody, stop worshipping the idol, and he says, I'm only worshipping the idol because Allah willed it. Well, is that true? Yes, it is true. Allah did will it. However, he cannot use that as an excuse to persist in his sin. Why? Because he has control over it. He has free will.
And also remember the narration of Adam and Musa والسلام, debating each other. Ibn Taymiyyah's opinion is that the blame was for being ejected out of the Jannah, not necessarily for the sin of eating the forbidden fruit. And the difference is, we said, eating the fruit was under the will of Adam alayhi, but not being ejected from Jannah. So Qadr can be used as an excuse for things out of your control, not for those things in your control. As for the situation of the Prophet asking Ali about the tahajjud, then one can argue that the Prophet was annoyed with Ali when he gave him this answer, using Qadr as an excuse, because it is still within your capability to wake up or have somebody wake you up. So one could interpret that narration and say that Ali radiallahu anh was just making excuses to get out of the tahajjud, and the Prophet became annoyed. And Allah knows best. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. What 4 matters does the angel write down when you are in the womb of your mother? Question number 2. If the decree is set, then what's the point in working righteous actions? Question number 3. If a kafir's child dies in infancy, then generally speaking, are they in Jahannam or in Jannah or where? Explain your answer using evidence.